Hello and welcome to the Strange Tales podcast presented by me, your host Winston R. Douglas. This week we take a look into the Stargate Project, which was a secret U.S. Army unit established in 1978 at Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. Work primarily involved remote viewing, the purported ability to psychically see events, sights or information from a great distance. The project was overseen until 1987 by Lieutenant Frederick Holmes Skip Atwater, an aide and psychic headhunter to Major General Albert Stubblebine, and later president of the Monroe Institute. The unit was small-scale, comprising about 15 to 20 individuals, and was run out of an old, leaky wooden barracks. The Stargate Project was terminated and declassified in 1995 after a CIA report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. Information provided by the program was vague and included irrelevant and erroneous data, and there was reason to suspect that its project managers had changed the reports, so they would fit background cues. The program was featured in the 2004 book and 2009 film, both titled The Men Who Stare at Goats, although neither mentions it by name. Okay, let's get into today's strange tale. Stargate Project was a secret U.S. Army unit established in 1978 at Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency DIA and Stanford Research Institute, SRI, International, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The project, and its precursors and sister projects, originally went by various code names: Gondola Wish, Stargate, Grill Flame, Centerlane, Project CF, Sunstreak, Scannet, until 1991 when they were consolidated and rechristened as Stargate Project. The CIA and DIA decided they should investigate and know as much about it as possible. Various programs were approved yearly and refunded accordingly. Reviews were made semi-annually at the Senate and House Select Committee level. Work results were reviewed, and remote viewing was attempted, with the results being kept secret from the viewer. It was thought that if the viewer was shown they were incorrect, it would damage the viewer's confidence and skill. This was standard operating procedure throughout the years of military and domestic remote viewing programs. Feedback to the remote viewer of any kind was rare. It was kept classified and secret. Remote viewing attempts to sense unknown information about places or events. Normally it is performed to detect current events, but during military and domestic intelligence applications viewers claimed to sense things in the future, experiencing precognition. In 1970, United States intelligence sources believed that the Soviet Union was spending 60 million rubles annually on psychotronic research. In response to claims that the Soviet program had produced results, the CIA initiated funding for a new program known as Scannet in the same year. Remote viewing research began in 1972 at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in Menlo Park, California. Proponents Russell Tark and Harold Puthoff of the research said that a minimum accuracy rate of 65% required by the clients was often exceeded in the later experiments. Physicists Russell Tark and Harold Puthoff began testing psychics for SRI in 1972, including one who would later become an international celebrity, Israeli Uri Geller. Their apparently successful results garnered interest within the U.S. Department of Defense. Ray Hyman, professor of psychology at the University of Oregon, was asked by Air Force psychologist Lieutenant Colonel Austin W. Kibler, then director of behavioral research for ARPA, to go to SRI and investigate. He was to specifically evaluate Geller. Hyman's report to the government was that Geller was a complete fraud, and as a consequence Tark and Puthoff lost their government contract to do further work with him. The result was a publicity tour for Geller, Tark, and Puthoff, to seek private funding for further research work on Geller. One of the project's successes was the location of a lost Soviet spy plane in 1976 by Rosemary Smith, a young administrative assistant recruited by project director Dale Graff. In 1977 the Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence Systems Exploitation Detachment started the Gondola Wish program to evaluate potential adversary applications of remote viewing. Army intelligence then formalized this in mid-1978 as an operational program Grill Flame, based in buildings 2560 and 2561 at Fort Meade, in Maryland. In early 1979 the research at SRI was integrated into Grill Flame, which was redesignated INSCOM Centerlane Project in 1983. In 1984 the existence of the program was reported by Jack Anderson, and in that year it was unfavorably received by the National Academy of Sciences National Research Council. In late 1985 the Army funding was terminated, but the program was redesignated Sunstreak and funded by the DIA's Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate. In 1991 most of the contracting for the program was transferred from SRI to Science Applications International Corporation, with Edwin May controlling 70% of the contractor funds and 85% of the data. Its security was altered from Special Access Program to Limited Dissemination, and it was given its final name, Stargate. In 1995 the Defense Appropriations Bill directed that the program be transferred from DIA to CIA oversight. The CIA commissioned a report by the American Institutes for Research that found that remote viewing had not been proved to work by a psychic mechanism, and said it had not been used operationally. The CIA subsequently cancelled and declassified the program. The appointed panel consisted primarily of Jessica Utz and Ray Hyman. Hyman had produced an unflattering report on Uri Geller and SRI for the government 2 decades earlier, but the psychologist David Marks found Utz's appointment to the review panel puzzling given that she had published papers with Edwin May, considering this joint research likely to make her less than impartial. A report by Utz claimed the results were evidence of psychic functioning. However, Hyman in his report argued Utz's conclusion that ESP had been proven to exist, especially precognition, was premature and the findings had not been independently replicated. Hyman came to the conclusion. Psychologists, such as myself, who study subjective validation find nothing striking or surprising in the reported matching of reports against targets in the Stargate data. The overwhelming amount of data generated by the viewers is vague, general, and way off target. The few apparent hits are just what we would expect if nothing other than reasonable guessing and subjective validation are operating. A later report by Ayer came to a negative conclusion. Joe Nickell has written. Other evaluators, 2 psychologists from Ayer, assessed the potential intelligence-gathering usefulness of remote viewing. They concluded that the alleged psychic technique was of dubious value and lacked the concreteness and reliability necessary for it to be used as a basis for making decisions or taking action. The final report found reason to suspect that in some well-publicized cases of dramatic hits the remote viewers might have had substantially more background information than might otherwise be apparent. According to Ayer, which performed a review of the project, no remote viewing report ever provided actionable information for any intelligence operation. Based upon the collected findings, which recommended a higher level of critical research and tighter controls, the CIA terminated the $20 million project, citing a lack of documented evidence that the program had any value to the intelligence community. Time magazine stated in 1995 3 full-time psychics were still working on a $500,000 a year budget out of Fort Meade, Maryland. David Marks in his book The Psychology of the Psychic discussed the flaws in the Stargate project in detail. Marks wrote that there were 6 negative design features of the experiments. The possibility of cues or sensory leakage was not ruled out. No independent replication. Some of the experiments were conducted in secret, making peer review impossible. Marks noted that the judge Edwin May was also the principal investigator for the project and this was problematic, making huge conflict of interest with collusion, cueing and fraud being possible. Marks concluded the project was nothing more than a subjective delusion and after 2 decades of research it had failed to provide any scientific evidence for the legitimacy of remote viewing. The Stargate Project was claimed to have been terminated in 1995 following an independent review which concluded, "The foregoing observations provide a compelling argument against continuation of the program within the intelligence community. Even though a statistically significant effect has been observed in the laboratory, it remains unclear whether the existence of a paranormal phenomenon, remote viewing, has been demonstrated. The laboratory studies do not provide evidence regarding the origins or nature of the phenomenon. The Stargate
assuming
Project
it
created a set of protocols designed to make the methodological clairvoyance and out-of-body experiences more scientific.
Further, even if it
could be
demonstrated
unequivocally that a paranormal phenomenon occurs under the
term
conditions
remote
present
viewing
in the
laboratory
laboratory paradigm to
These
describe
conditions
this more
of limited
structured
applicability
approach to
and
clairvoyance.
utility
For intelligence
Project
gathering
Stargate
would only
operations.
receive a mission.
For
After
example,
all other
the
intelligence
nature of the
attempts,
remote viewing
methods,
targets
or
are vastly
approaches had
dissimilar,
already been
as are the
exhausted.
specific tasks
It was
required
reported
of the
that at
remote
peak
viewers.
manpower there were over
Most
22
importantly,
active
the
military and
information
civilian
provided
remote
by
viewers
remote
providing
viewing is
data.
vague and ambiguous,
People leaving
making
the
it
project
difficult,
were not
if not
replaced.
impossible,
When
for
the
the technique
project
to
closed
yield
in
information of
1995,
sufficient
this
quality
number
and
had
accuracy
dwindled
of
down to
information
3.
for actionable
One
intelligence.
was using tarot cards.
Thus, we conclude
according to
that continued
Joseph
use of
McMonigle,
remote viewing in
the Army never
intelligence
had a
gathering
truly open
operations is
attitude
not
towards
warranted.
psychic functioning.
In January
2017,
2017,
the use of the term
CIA
Diggle
published
factor and the
records
saying,
online
"I
of the
wouldn't want to
Stargate
be found
Project
dead
as part
next
of the
to a
Crest
psychic."
archive.
In the 1970s, CIA and DIA granted funds to Harold D. Puthoff to investigate paranormal abilities, collaborating with Russell Tark in a study of the purported psychic abilities of Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, Joseph McMonigle and others, as part of the Stargate Project, of which Puthoff became a director. As with Ingo Swann and Pat Price, Puthoff attributed much of his personal remote viewing skills to his involvement with Scientology, whereby he had attained, at that time, the highest level. All three eventually left Scientology in the late 1970s. Puthoff worked as the principal investigator of the project. His team of psychics is said to have identified spies, located Soviet weapons and technologies, such as a nuclear submarine in 1979, and helped find lost Scud missiles in the First Gulf War and plutonium in North Korea in 1994. In the 1970s, Russell Tark began working with Harold Puthoff on Stargate Project, while working with him as a researcher at Stanford Research Institute. Edwin C. May joined the Stargate Project in 1975 as a consultant and was working full-time in 1976. The original project was part of the Cognitive Sciences Laboratory managed by May. With more funding in 1991, May took the project to the Palo Alto offices at SAIC. This would last until 1995, when the CIA closed the project. May worked as the principal investigator, judge and the Stargate keeper for the project. Marx says this was a serious weakness for the experiments, as May had conflict of interest and could have done whatever he wanted with the data. Marx has written that May refused to release the names of the Oversight Committee and refused permission for him to give an independent judging of the Stargate transcripts. Marx found this suspicious, commenting, "This refusal suggests that something must be wrong with the data or with the methods of data selection." Originally tested in the Phase 1 were RV experiments at the American Society for Psychical Research, under research director Carlos Osis, a former Scientologist, who alleged to have coined the term remote viewing as a derivation of protocols originally developed by René Warcollier, a French chemical engineer in the early 20th century. Documented in the book Mind to Mind, Classics in Consciousness series books by Swann's achievement was to break free from the conventional mold of casual experimentation and candidate burnout, and develop a viable set of protocols that put clairvoyance within a framework named coordinate remote viewing. In a 1995 letter, Edwin C. May wrote he had not used Swann for 2 years because there were rumors of him briefing a high-level person at SAIC and the CIA on remote viewing and aliens, ETs. A former Burbank, California, police officer and former Scientologist who participated in a number of Cold War-era remote viewing experiments, including the U.S. government-sponsored Project Scannet and the Stargate Project. Price joined the program after a chance encounter with fellow Scientologists Harold Puthoff and Ingo Swann near SRI.
Working with maps and photographs provided to him by the CIA, Price claimed to have been able to retrieve information from facilities behind Soviet lines. He is probably best known for his sketches of cranes and gantries which appeared to conform to CIA intelligence photographs. At the time, the CIA took his claims seriously. A key sponsor of the research internally at Fort Meade, Maryland, Major General Stubblebine was convinced of the reality of a wide variety of psychic phenomena. He required that all of his battalion commanders learn how to bend spoons a la Uri Geller, and he himself attempted several psychic feats, even attempting to walk through walls. In the early 1980s he was responsible for the United States Army Intelligence and Security Command, during which time the remote viewing project in the U.S. Army began. Some commentators have confused a Project Jedi, allegedly run by Special Forces primarily out of Fort Bragg, with Stargate. After some controversy involving these experiments, including alleged security violations from uncleared civilian psychics working in sensitive compartmented information facilities, Major General Stubblebine was placed on retirement. His successor as the INSCOM commander was Major General Harry Soyster, who had a reputation as a much more conservative and conventional intelligence officer. MG Soyster was not amenable to continuing paranormal experiments, and the Army's participation in Project Stargate ended during his tenure. In his book, Psychic Warrior, Inside the CIA's Stargate Program, The True Story of a Soldier's Espionage and Awakening, Morehouse claims to have worked on hundreds of remote viewing assignments, from searching for a Soviet jet that crashed in the jungle carrying an atomic bomb, to tracking suspected double agents. McMoneagle claims he had a remarkable memory of very early childhood events. He grew up surrounded by alcoholism, abuse and poverty. As a child, he had visions at night when scared, and began to hone his psychic abilities in his teens for his own protection when he hitchhiked. He enlisted to get away. McMoneagle became an experimental remote viewer while serving in U.S. Army intelligence. Dames was one of the first 5 Army students trained by Ingo Swann through Stage 3 in coordinate remote viewing. Because Dames' role was intended to be as session monitor and analyst as an aide to Fred Atwater rather than a remote viewer, Dames received no further formal remote viewing training. After his assignment to the remote viewing unit at the end of January 1986, he was used to run remote viewers, as monitor, and provide training and practice sessions to viewer personnel. He soon established a reputation for pushing CRV to extremes, with target sessions on Atlantis, Mars, UFOs, and aliens. He is a frequent guest on the Coast to Coast AM radio shows. Thank you all so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed today's strange tale. If you did, please smash that gorgeous like button, and subscribe so that you will be notified to future shows. Also, if you could write a 5-star review, that would really help us get the word out, so other people can enjoy the podcast as well. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Strange Tales Pod. Or you can message me at strangetalespod@gmail.com, with feedback or ideas on future shows. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/strangetalespod, where we have plans from as little as $3 a month, and you can opt out anytime. Any help is much appreciated. This is me, your host Winston R. Douglas, signing out for now. Thanks again, hope to see you again soon.